season of frequent rains that put 1993 in the St. Louis record books. It was a sudden downpour at Cliff Cave Park that turned the flooding deadly.
Imagine the terror of being trapped in pitch-black darkness, standing on a tiny ledge, surrounded by freezing water. The screams of your friends echo and then are swallowed by the water, leaving you in haunting silence. This was the horrifying reality for 13-year-old Gary Maher. For 24 agonizing hours, he clung to life, waiting for rescue. This is his story. Gary Maher, just 13 years old, had been getting into serious trouble over a few months. He fell in with a bad crowd, began staying out late, and often didn't come home. This led to regular clashes with the police, despite his mum's efforts to discipline him and keep him out of trouble. They lived in a rough neighborhood plagued by crime and poverty, and she worried this environment could shape his future badly. Things escalated to a point where Gary had to go to St. Joseph's Home for Boys, a center for troubled youth. His mum struggled with sending him there but felt she had no choice. She hoped it would provide the guidance she couldn't give at home. Gary could only come home every other weekend until his behavior improved. A few weeks into his stay at the boys' home, the Midwest was hit by record flooding. The flooding had resulted in dozens of deaths, billions of dollars in damages, and left 30,000 people homeless across the country. After a long period of rain, there was finally a break, and the boys' home took the kids to Cliff Cave County Park, close to their facility. Gary was part of this group, which included 16 boys aged 7 to 14 and 4 counselors. When they arrived, they noticed signs along the road that said the road was closed. Unaware that the signs hadn't been there before and enjoying the sunny day, the group ignored the road closure and continued toward the cave entrance. The roads were closed due to additional flooding in some low-lying areas of the park, but the cave itself seemed unaffected. The boys began climbing rocks and exploring the spacious entrance. One of the counselors, an experienced caver, asked if anyone wanted to venture deeper into the cave. Only 5 of the 16 boys, including Gary, volunteered. Reassured by the presence of 2 counselors, they eagerly entered the main tunnel. Starting from a wide opening, the cave narrowed into a passage just tall enough for a person, gradually becoming even narrower. The main passage branched into several side tunnels, forming a complex network of winding paths. As the boys ventured deeper, a small stream at the bottom gradually crept up to ankle height. Initially, the water level remained unchanged. However, on that fateful Friday, after the group had gone deeper into the cave, a sudden torrential downpour began outside. They only noticed the water rising slightly around their legs at first, but soon water was pouring in from the ceiling and down the walls, creating literal waterfalls along the passages. The kids screamed out as water poured in from all directions, and the group started running for the exit. Suddenly, a 5-foot wall of water came from the opposite direction, sweeping their feet from under them and carrying them back into the darkness. They struggled to keep their heads above water as the current carried them helplessly, battering them along the walls. Outside, the sky had opened up again, and soon the mouth of the cave was swirling with water. The ground was completely saturated, unable to absorb any more water, causing it to wash down into sinkholes and sumps that littered the area. This meant the cave filled up much more quickly than usual. The group outside the cave saw the water draining into the area and climbed to higher ground, contacting 911 from the safety of their vans. The rain started around 1:45 p.m., and within 15 minutes, the flash flood burst through the area. Rescuers arrived at the cave within 30 minutes, while the other group anxiously waited in their vans. Tragically, near the cave entrance, they discovered 3 bodies tangled among trees and debris. This grim discovery left only 4 others unaccounted for inside Cliff Cave. Around 6 p.m., rescuers entered the cave mouth, navigating through waist-deep, water-filled corridors in search of more survivors or bodies. The water levels were significantly higher than earlier, making progress through the submerged passages challenging. About 1,000 feet further in, they found a fourth body. Using stretchers, rescuers carefully brought the body out to the waiting, grief-stricken parents outside. Rescuers began considering the possibility that some bodies might have been swept out of the cave and downstream toward the Mississippi River. They spent several more hours that evening combing the water's edge before calling off the search for the day. Experienced cavers assisting in the search held little hope of finding any survivors. Throughout that night, many of the side passages remained submerged up to the ceiling. They had to wait until the following day for the water to recede to access these areas. One particular area, known as Drapery Crawl, was completely flooded. This passage, just 2 to 3 feet high, requires crawling along your stomach for up to 45 minutes to get through to the other side. That night, the water was all the way up to the ceiling in Drapery Crawl, and the likelihood of someone being alive further in was low. The following morning at around 9 a.m., police, paramedics, and cavers were back at the cave, ready to find the missing group members. They made their way to Drapery Crawl about an hour later, finding that the water was low enough to search those areas. As they continued into a small side passage, they heard a noise. Initially, they thought it was coming from the searchers behind them, but then they heard it again, the little voice of Gary Maher somewhere in the darkness. After the crawl, there was a small room about 10 feet wide and 3 feet high with a pocket in the ceiling. Gary was up against the wall, standing on a tiny ledge with his head poking into the pocket. He called out, and the rescuers ran over, got him down, and onto a stretcher. They covered him in blankets, and finally, after almost 24 hours in the cold darkness, Gary was brought out into the sunlight. The ledge Gary was standing on was just a few inches wide, barely enough to stand on. Below him was the cold, receding water. If he had slipped, he would have likely died of hypothermia long before being rescued. Incredibly, despite everything, Gary was just happy to be rescued. They got him some food and took him to his mom. Unfortunately, no one else would be as lucky.
Yeah, I just hold on to the opening, go like this, and go down. Still reaching for air pockets, and I still had my flashlight, and I saw a few of the bodies float by me. I wanted to panic, but I was thinking about them and myself at the same time. And I said, well, they're already dead, still a chance.
Searchers were finally able to access the full length of the cave. About 300 feet further from where Gary was found, they discovered the final 2 bodies. Out of the 7 that had entered Cliff Cave the day prior, Gary was the only survivor. Perhaps the worst part of all were the events Gary conveyed when asked about the day prior. Shortly after the group was hit by the rushing water, they were pushed under and fully submerged. Gary held his breath, waiting until his head was above water again. This happened repeatedly, and he saw the other kids doing the same. He heard their screams and remembered his sister, a lifeguard, telling him to stay calm if ever close to drowning. This advice kept him calm and gave him the presence of mind to feel for the walls or ceiling to grab onto. After the ordeal, Gary's mom brought him home, unable to bear the thought of losing him again. Entering Cliff Cave that day was a tragic mistake, despite warnings of impending rain. The loss of 6 lives highlighted the importance of heeding safety warnings, especially during adverse weather. Gary's survival was a miracle, but it came at a high cost. His story is a powerful reminder of the fragility of life and the need for vigilance and safety. If you found this video informative and moving, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of courage, survival, and important lessons. Stay safe, and remember to always prioritize safety in every situation.